in terms of our challenge of meeting net zero by 2050. We've got an incredibly distinguished panel with us today, and I'm really excited that our first speaker will be Andy Burnham, the Metro Mayor of Greater Manchester, who will be leading us off. And what I really want to emphasise before handing over to Andy and introducing the rest of our panellists is what we can achieve in terms of the supply chains that we rely on. So you'll hear from those like Julian Walker from Associated British Ports about the critical role that many of our northern ports have played keeping our economy moving during these very difficult times. And the challenge is not just across rail freight, but across the modes. How do we decarbonise not only passenger transport and then the work that's been done on active travel, particularly in Greater Manchester, but across our northern cities, not just in the recent weeks and months, but over the last 3 years has been incredible in terms of the turnaround and how we think about individuals' mobility. But we also need to think about how freight moves around as well, because clearly, if we're going to address the decarbonisation challenge, we need to go after all those sources of both CO2, but also air quality issues in our cities, and the supply chains that they rely on that stretch globally as well as across the Northern Powerhouse. So for us, I think this is a really important opportunity, and very glad to see, as always, that we've got a real stellar lineup of speakers today. I think we're going to look at what we've got in terms of speakers now, just to quickly run you through them. So, as well as Andy, we have Julian Walker, who I just mentioned, Chief Commercial Officer at Associated British Ports, who'll be responding to Andy's comments, along with David Clark, the Technical Director of the Railway Industry Association, and Tim Wood, who's the Northern Powerhouse Rail Director at Transport for the North. In our second session, we have Mayor Jamie Driscoll, the Metro Mayor of the North of Tyne, who will be responded to by Claire Haig, the Chief Executive of Greener Journeys, and Councillor Angeliki Sturgia from the Greater Manchester Transport Committee. And then we've got a number of other voices from across the sector, including from Transport Focus, who we'll be bringing in throughout the discussion. Please do reflect on those key questions that I just mentioned. So how do we accelerate that green recovery? What is the role of the decarbonisation of transport? And clearly, alongside energy, one of the key, alongside heat and electricity, the key kind of drivers of our decarbonisation pathway. We at the Northern Powers Partnership certainly believe that we need an economic stimulus, the way that Andy called for, to build back better. And the government has responded and adopted that language. Let's hope they also take on some of Andy's intent and purpose, and those of his fellow Metro mayors and of our northern businesses, who certainly do believe we need a significant focus on decarbonising the economy in order to create the jobs we need. In terms of housekeeping, do use the hashtag Green Recovery and tag AB Ports 21 and Devo Connect to keep the discussion going online. There is the chat function, which I'm sure you're well schooled in, with Zoom being second nature to many of us now. And do select all panellists and attendees, so that those who are on the call, and great to see that Laurie and a number of others have already tested the chat function, so do join in. And as well as your good mornings, which obviously I appreciate the sentiment, please do also put your questions in there as well. If you could also just make sure that if you do want to ask a question, do just put the text in, and then if we have got time, I will try and bring a few people in as well. But otherwise, I'll throw your question into the debate as quickly as we can to get as many points heard as possible. So on that note, I think it really falls to me to give the floor to Andy Burnham, and to particularly thank our organisers at Devo Connect, as well as our sponsors at AB Ports, for making this morning's session possible. So Andy, really delighted you can be with us this morning, and really look forward to hearing your reflections on the topic, and also what the perspective is from yourself in Greater Manchester, but also from your key role as one of the leading board members of Transport for the North.
Thanks very much, Henry. Good morning, everybody. It's great to join you. I won't be able to stay, unfortunately, so we'll have to leave after I've spoken, Henry. But please don't see that as a reflection on the Fringe, because I'd like to be here debating all of this with you. It's just obviously the difficult situation that we find ourselves in. And given that, this sort of moment and another difficult moment for everybody, with what is clear to be further restrictions coming, I think Build Back Better kind of needs to, acquire a new potency, because we've got to keep hopeful here, haven't we, and see that in the end something good will come from all of this. And we have to make it more than a phrase, don't we? And I think in Greater Manchester that is going to be true, Henry, because in early October we will make a series of significant announcements in the first week under the banner "The Future of Greater Manchester." We will be coming back with our Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. That will make people's hearts sink a little more. But actually alongside it will be the consultation on our clean air plan. And the two things actually do go together. This is a vision for our city region over the next 20 to 30 years. And in the case of the clean air plan, this isn't sort of build back better as pie in the sky. This is very real now. We're under an instruction from the government to introduce a clean air zone. We have chosen to make that a 10-borough clean air zone, the biggest in the country. And with that comes an opportunity, not just to clean up the air, but to use the clean air drive as simultaneously the drive to improve public transport, to make these two things happen at the same time. And that's very much the argument that I'm putting forward. Jamie, other mayors across the country will this week be putting in their spending review bids, so the Fringe is very well timed with that in mind. We are all making our pitches to the government at the moment. When you asked at the start, Henry, with your questions on that slide, what are our reset transport priorities? Mine is very much to say to the government, look, levelling up can't just be about big infrastructure that might be delivered in 20 or 30 years' time. It has to be about the here and now, and I think the pandemic has really brought that to the fore. It's going to be about both of those things. And actually, given the work Greater Manchester has done on bus reform, on clean air, on our thinking around an integrated London-style transport system, I think we are ready to go in many ways, coming immediately out of this crisis, to put in place a London-style transport system within a parliament. And I think the clean air imperative is the thing that will actually really kind of make that happen to a clear timetable. So what we've got at the moment is a plan that has some funding allocated from the government for people to switch vehicles, clean lorries, buses, crucially clean taxis, because the taxi trade has had a battering this year. And I think we really do need to help them navigate this change. I suppose what I will be saying to the government, and I'll be asking our Greater Manchester MPs to do this too, is, look, there's two ways we could do this. If we underfund it, clean air and the kind of drive towards it will be kind of resented, and you'll have business voices saying, look, after everything we've been through, you're going to hit us with this now, and there isn't enough money here to change our vehicles. It's all very difficult, which I would understand. So that is one way, and you might say that's probably the most likely course, given the way things generally tend to work. Or the government could say, look, okay, this is the first area that's going big on a clean air reform with a sort of kind of parallel goal of a London-style public transport system. So let's do it here in Greater Manchester and do it properly. And then that becomes a template for the North as the rest of the North comes in behind us, because everyone is on different stages of this journey towards more integrated, more affordable public transport. And so how this might work in practice, Henry, to kind of give you a very clear illustration, let's just say, let me give you the vision. Our vision in Greater Manchester is in this Parliament, as I say, a London-style transport system. So in effect, Metrolink, the tram system, is extended to be bus and tram, so that you have a daily cap on what people can spend, no matter how many trams or buses they take. You would obviously look at a single livery system. It could be all electric. So actually, if funding was allocated for us to buy those buses, those electric buses, to quickly change the fleet, that can create a revenue stream for public transport in Greater Manchester later down the line, as we kind of lease out those buses to the operators in any reformed system. So this is the chance that we've got right before us. We also have simultaneously a plan for minimum taxi licensing standards, again, to move to a single livery taxi system. And we think this is sort of part of what makes Greater Manchester a world-class city. In that, you go to an airport anywhere in the world and you would expect to see a sort of consistent public transport fleet and taxi system. And we think we can do that with the plans that we've got. And of course, all of it being zero emission. But if you take the example of the taxi companies, if they are kind of forced to stretch themselves financially, and some of the self-employed people who work within that sector to make the shift from a polluting vehicle to a cleaner vehicle, then obviously the damage that will be done to people's livelihoods will be massive, and the whole thing will be resented. And what I will be saying to the government is the whole opportunity will have been lost, because we'll just have resentment about clean air. It will be felt to be a small business tax if people don't get the right support to change vehicle. And then the drive to improve public transport will be shrouded in controversy, and we'll get bogged down in all of these issues. So, look at the opportunity that's in front of us here, to really kind of make quick progress with the public support with us, both on cleaning up the air, giving cities like Greater Manchester a London-style integrated transport system. And by the way, Henry, it's perfectly possible within a parliament for us to have a single system over bus and tram with a daily cap on what people can spend. Perfectly possible to achieve that. And my argument will be that will give levelling up more meaning in the short term than it all being about high vis and hard hats and something that might be delivered in 2040. Both of the things are important, I have to say, but getting the here and now of people's everyday transport is even more important, and it can then show how we are kind of building towards a green recovery, as the title of this Fringe says. We can, I think, really start to change the way people move in a city like Greater Manchester. Most of the northern cities, and I think most of the cities outside of London, to be honest, are still built for the car. Let's be honest about that. Travelling around on public transport where you've got, no integrated ticketing system. So when you get off a train and get on a tram, you pay again as though you're a new customer. That is creating a massive financial disincentive for people to use public transport. And what we've got to do, if we are going to put the cities outside of London on a path to a green recovery, is, well, I would say, make cycling and walking people's first port of call, certainly for the first mile and the last mile. And then from there, add an integrated, more affordable public transport system into the mix. And we're on with a major investment in cycling infrastructure, the B network, led by Chris Boardman. That too, I think, needs to be progressed alongside these plans. And I'll finish, Henry, on this point. It's about levelling up, isn't it? And redefining levelling up, I think, is what has to happen post-pandemic. It's kind of been a bit shrunken, I think, by Whitehall into an agenda about R&D, innovation and infrastructure. Now, all of those three things are really important, don't get me wrong, but that can't be the sum total of levelling up. The truth of the matter is, the North has been levelled down this year. The announcements that we're kind of going to hear later today, the curfew on hospitality, well, hospitality here has already been struggling with the restrictions all summer. So, these measures have a real impact on people's lives and on people's businesses. And I think that the already more fragile northern economy has been damaged significantly through the course of this year. So levelling up in many ways has gone backwards in 2020. And we've got to start from the recognition of that. And it therefore has to be about getting the foundations right before we think of HS2 or Northern Powerhouse Rail, important as those things are, rebuilding a kind of transport system from first principles that works for people in an everyday sense. And as far as I'm concerned, levelling up will not have happened until a single bus journey costs the same in Greater Manchester as it currently costs in London. The £1.50 per journey is a great thing in London because it connects people to opportunity, it supports a productive economy, it gets people out of their cars. Well, You know, £4 here doesn't do any of those things that I've just mentioned. It creates barriers to opportunity. It forces people into their cars. And until those kind of issues are addressed, I don't think we'll be on our way to a green recovery, nor do I think levelling up will have any direct relevance to most people who live and work in a city region like ours. That's the more kind of challenging point. The positive is the plans are in place. We are ready to go. If the government is to back us, we can show levelling up within a parliament, and it could transform a great city region like ours. Thanks, Henry.
Thanks, Andy. And clearly we'll maybe get into the detail with colleagues from TFN about Neuster. Tim's exited stage left, which is very sensible, because clearly many of us remember, and I think it's Jim O'Neill certainly remembers, signing the cheque to Transport for the North when he was at the Treasury for delivering some of those opportunities you've mentioned in GM extended, so people in Greater Manchester can travel to Liverpool, can travel to Leeds with all the same benefits. And I think certainly our colleagues in the bus industry have probably got some questions to answer about why it's been so difficult to get some of those systems in place across the north.
Can I just say on that, sorry Henry, you've probably
been... Well, no, I've been too competitive there, Andy.
The trouble with that is, it put the cart before the horse, because you can't integrate ticketing when the governance is still completely fragmented. And I think that's the learning point of that, isn't it? If you create a governance structure, a devolved governance structure, where tram, bus, train are under the control of regional transport authorities, you then can come to an integrated ticketing solution that's not just for a city region, but for the whole of the north. But I think, as we saw with rail infrastructure, our ambitions to do things outstripped the reality of transport here in the here and now, and some fundamentals need to be changed before you can implement visions of that kind. But you know, I would just say, give us the powers, give us the funding, and we'll get on and do it.
I'm glad I managed to get you onto buses, Andy, because I was shocked that you'd held back from your. I know we did talk a bit about bus fares, so you got it in a bit there, but I was impressed with how restrained you were being to not take us down the bus lane, as it were. So thanks again, Andy. I know you.
Cheers, Henry. Thanks, everyone. I'm sorry I've got to go. Unfortunately, I can't hear Julian.
Thank you so much for coming. No, it's been a pleasure to have you. So at that point, we'll say goodbye to Andy and the most famous loft in Britain, of course, Andy's office. So a genuine celebrity room. If you watch Newsnight, of course, for the rest of you, maybe have different things you do in your evenings after 10:45. You may not have recognised it. But next, I'm going to bring in Julian Walker, who is joining us from Associated British Ports. And obviously, I think it's worth particularly paying tribute, not just to Julian, but all his colleagues who've continued working during the crisis to keep our economy moving. And there are many public transport workers, both in local public transport, but also in our logistics industry and across the rail industry, for example, who have continued working at great risk to themselves and their families. And it's a testament to ABP, what they've done to be able to keep their colleagues safe whilst they've been doing that essential work in the national interest. So, Julian, really looking forward to hearing from you about what you think some of the opportunities might be. Clearly, Andy's given us a slightly more local flavour in his remarks around what could be achieved within Greater Manchester. But obviously ABP with Immingham and the wider Humber ports, both sides of the Humber and Hull as well, and the rest of the network are really the key gateway to international markets for the North. And clearly not all emissions are local. A lot of them are global and national. How do you feel the North's public transport system can support decarbonisation, both for freight but also for individual passengers as well? But I think freight clearly is where some of the great quick wins might be.
Yeah, no, thank you, Henry, and good morning to everybody on the meeting, and thank you also, Henry, for the comments about what the whole supply chain, the whole logistics supply chain has managed to achieve over the last 6 months, and that covers multi-modes worth of transport and the work that everybody's done, and that's very much appreciated. Just to give some background to those on the call, ABP is the UK's largest port operator. We operate 21 ports around the UK. In the north of England, we operate, or on the northwest side of England, we operate the ports of Barrow, Garston, Silloth, and Fleetwood, and then also in southwest Scotland, Ayr and Troon. And then on the east coast, we operate the ports of Hull, Goole, Grimsby, and Immingham. And just to give it context, through the Humber ports, that's about £75 billion worth of trade that transits through the Humber on any given year. And overall, ABP handles about 25% of the UK's trade. So, we play a very significant role. But I think it's very important to recognise the whole role that ports play across the country. And through the pandemic, this has continued largely unhindered, which is a great attribute to the industry and the supporting infrastructure that goes with that, both from a road haulage perspective, but also on rail. But going forward, our ports at ABP, and I think the broader sector, will play a really important role in accelerating the green recovery. And from an ABP perspective, this obviously takes particular relevance in the north. And the key thing for us is about connecting our port infrastructure network with the BCOs, the beneficial cargo owners, so the markets that we move to. And that will be driven primarily through improving rail freight, which will essentially improve the connectivity for us to shift cargoes from the ports to those end markets and take trucks off the road, which will obviously have a big impact on congestion and also reduce emissions. Now, from ABP's perspective, as I mentioned, the Humber is a key trading route, and post-Brexit, the EU will probably remain our key trading partner. I think that's highly likely, and therefore making sure that we link the Humber ports with the Northwest remains critical. And as part of that, improving the East-West connectivity is going to be essential. So essentially investing in the Trans-Pennine route to help increase the amount of traffic and the size of containers and trains that can be carried across that. So what we're very much looking for and pushing hard for is investment in the gauge enhancement on the Trans-Pennine route to enable the efficient movement of containers by rail, as opposed to the present route where they have to go south to then come north, which is highly inefficient and frankly much less cost effective, takes longer, and consequently the industry and customers don't want to use it. The benefit of doing that will obviously, as I touched on already, reduce the amount of traffic that's carried by truck, and will go a long way to relieving the congestion on the M62 corridor, which for those of you who live close to that are only too aware of. So for us, the improvement on that particular route is fundamental to help opening up the north. And essentially, it's almost taking the south out of the equation completely, because as we are all aware, as part of the Brexit preparation, there is huge concerns about congestion around Dover and the implications that will have. So one of our strong arguments is, think Humber. This is a route where you can essentially deliver the goods from the EU straight into the north, and then to be able to have that link by rail into the northwest would make that supply chain much more efficient, and then reduce the reliance on Dover and the southern ports. Overall, we look to HS2, and Andy was talking about long-term projects, and clearly that's one of the longest-term projects that any of us are aware of. But it will make a big difference. It won't make a difference as far as we're concerned about reducing rail journey times. For us, it's about creating capacity on the existing network to be able to shift more freight by rail, which obviously has the benefits from motorway safety, from air quality, and the overall reduction of carbon emissions. And just to give it context, each train that's carrying containers takes about 76 lorries off our roads, which will have a big implication in terms of reducing that congestion as well as decarbonising the sector. So for us, the key thing is about the infrastructure. And I know, as Andy was saying, we need to have change happening here and now. But for us, it's about building that longer term infrastructure that will create those benefits. And I think going forward, ports have a fundamental role to play in that. We are very keen, as I touched on, to open up the north from a trading perspective between the EU and the Humber, and we've recently invested 50 million in expanding our container ports, and that will go a long way to helping boost both trade, but jobs and activity across the Humber, but also those big regional cities like Sheffield, like Leeds and Manchester, as that trade is refocused into the north. I think the other key area, and this is as we start our recovery, hopefully from COVID-19, but very much focused on that green recovery, is to see the growth of the hydrogen sector. And the ports have a huge role to play in that. Just to give it context, the Humber in itself, when you combine Drax, you combine British Steel, you combine the two petrochemical facilities there, is one of the biggest producers of CO2 in the country. And that is something that, as a country, we have to deal with. And hydrogen and CCUS, so carbon capture, usage and storage, utilization and storage, is going to be a fundamental part of that. And as part of the government's drive for a green recovery, there is focus on the hydrogen sector, both in terms of large scale, where we're talking green hydrogen, so taking the benefit of renewable power generated through the offshore wind sector in the North Sea, and through an electrolysis process, creating hydrogen that can then be used to power transport, but also the associated CCS, the carbon capture part of that, which is going to be absolutely fundamental to driving this green recovery. I think with focus and clarity from government, we will start to see that accelerate. At ABP, we did a big investment back in about 2012 with a company called Siemens Gamesa. It was 300 plus million, building offshore wind infrastructure and blades, and that's been a huge success in terms of supplying the offshore wind growth in the North Sea. What we have been less good, and there are still large efforts by both the private sector but also the public sector to try and recover from this, is benefit from the landside basis of the growth of offshore wind. The UK has led the world globally in terms of the installation of offshore wind. Where we've not been so good is securing the jobs, the innovation, and the inward foreign investment into the country. And as part of the development of the hydrogen sector, one of our big calls on government is to have that clarity, that support that's required for that, because fundamentally, to really achieve the decarbonisation that the climate needs, the globe needs, we need to move away entirely from sort of fossil fuel combustion engines, and hydrogen is going to be central to that. So thank you, Henry.
Thank you, Julian. And I think really helpfully making the case for the wider energy system around transport, because clearly hydrogen's a key part of some of the local transport opportunities in Thames Valley, but also longer term, a real important way for us to think about how we achieve some of our ambitions on the rail network for decarbonisation without always necessarily having to electrify everything, which isn't necessarily the best model for everywhere. So I think it really brings that home to people. I was next going to bring in David Clark just with a couple of minutes of reflections, David. And I think you may have picked up a challenge there from Julian about TRU and Trans-Pennine Route Upgrade perhaps not being quite what we were promised. It feels a bit more like a renewal than an improvement at times, because it's been going on so long that I don't think Network Rail have spent a penny between Manchester and Leeds for a very long time. And so a lot of the money seems to be going on things I would consider to be general maintenance rather than an improvement. In terms of your perspectives on TRU, but also more widely, what would be your response to some of Julian's challenges from a kind of customer perspective, taking us back to the Williams review and the fact that everyone is a customer, Julian's a customer, Julian's customers are customers of the rail network, but also we've seen this week clearly essentially the end of the franchise system, and to what extent as well, to answer Andy's challenge around control of the rail network, which will be essential for him to get his cross-ticketing and integrated network he wants by the end of this Parliament. Will GM Rail, will the North taking more responsibility for concessions for the suburban network and some of our local services? To what extent do you think that's in the government's thinking and will be in the white paper that will bring forward Keith's proposals later in the year or next year, whenever it comes? David, the floor is yours. Come off mute, David.
Yeah. Thank you, Henry. Yeah, thanks for that. So just quick background, RIA is the trade association for the rail supply chain. I can't really answer all those questions directly on behalf of the wider industry, but I can give my view as an organisation operating in the market. I think we'd all agree 2020 has been far from a normal year. As you said earlier, great credit to everybody all in the rail industry that we've proven ourselves to be an essential service and kept things running throughout the crisis. Now we look forward to rebuilding. With regards to the point about TRU, the plans for TRU are quite ambitious, actually, in terms of the volume of work. Personally, I wouldn't disagree with Julian that we need to look at gauge clearance. I'm not sure that that's yet in scope, which seems to be something that quite rightly Julian would want to challenge. I think from my perspective, I think many of the long-term plans that were laid before coronavirus are still very, very relevant. The issue is actually now about ramping them up and delivering them. And we're currently in a situation where the railway, frankly, from a supply chain point of view in this part of the world, is relatively quiet. We are not that busy. We have a latent capacity to do more, and therefore, if we want to recover, we should actually be starting to bring forward those projects and get them out there and get them working, so we can deliver the economic benefits that are there to give. And of course, the railway is a great thing from the point of view of economic benefits, because not only does it deliver when it's completed the transport benefit, be it freight or passenger, but also it delivers a huge economic benefit to the supply chain. And we've got an opportunity really to create a vibrant, strong supply chain in the north, based upon those long-term priorities, those long-term plans. So we worked with a group of members under the banner of the Northern Rail Industry Leaders to produce a white paper last year. And as I say, that it's still, what we said in there is still very, very relevant, because we talked about the importance of a consistent pipeline rather than the boom and bust that we tend to experience currently. And we estimate that eliminating that could reduce the cost of a typical investment by up to 30%, which cycles back into an improved business case. We talked about decarbonisation, which all the speakers have talked about, and we see the real opportunity to initiate a rolling programme of electrification, and we know how to do that. We've demonstrated as an industry, after some problems 5 years ago, that we can deliver electrification efficiently, cost effectively, and there are places in the north where you could be getting on and doing that. We also need to see rolling out of zero carbon rolling stock, and there are a number of offers out there that you could go and procure now for zero carbon rolling stock, but we're not yet placing those orders as an industry. And there's a sense of urgency here, quite apart from the recovery. A ton of carbon saved in 2020 is 30 tons you've saved by the time you get to 2050. So the sooner we get on with this, the better. Digitalization is another opportunity for the region. We've got a strong capability in the region in terms of SMEs working in that area. So let's give them the market in the rail industry to build on that. At a more ambitious level, East Coast Digital Programme is the only active digital signalling programme in the country. So let's use that as a springboard to create a skills legacy in the north. And that brings me really around to one of the most important bits, which is people and skills. And we estimate, Tim will tell us about his programme in a moment, but we estimate, just looking at Northern Powerhouse Rail, that to the supply chain is 10,000 new jobs and 600 million per annum on the GVA, and that's the GVA for the supply chain on top of the GVA that Tim calculates for the whole project. That is how important rail investment is to the north. And of course, the north, I'm surprised nobody said this in these conversations. Somebody always says the north is where we invented the railways, and we have a strong research capability and intrinsic supply chain capability in the north, which we can build on and again be the leading edge of innovation. You did ask me about Williams, and
sorry, Dave, we're going to come back to Williams because we need to.
I was going to answer that question, but
we'll come back to Keith because he's a seminal figure in the industry, in the rail industry, but I'm also conscious that we need to get others in. So thank you for trying to answer it. I do appreciate that. So Tim Wood, who's the Northern Powerhouse Rail Director, I'm asked to bring in just a couple of reflections because we're going to have to go to Jamie Driscoll next, Tim. You heard the challenge from Andy, both around his focus on achieving smart ticketing at the level of Greater Manchester. Clearly, you have a colleague in your team who looks after that project. So we get some reflections at what might be achieved in this Parliament on smart ticketing and walk-on connectivity, so making it easy for people to use the existing network in this Parliament. But I think it would also be good to get your reflections, Tim, on MPR as a project, because clearly that is a really important opportunity to decarbonise, because there's significant opportunities to get people off the roads and quickly, hopefully, with some of the renewals and, much more excitingly, the upgrades that are part of the MPR programme. So it'd be great to get your reflections, Tim, but if we can have something on smart ticketing at the northern level, it'd be good to get an answer to that, because I know Andy was saying, I don't know if you were hearing that obviously there were some structural industry issues, I think in the bus industry, I think we were alluding to, that maybe made that difficult. If the city regions were to take control of their bus networks, would TfN find it easier to finish smart ticketing and gating across the north? I suppose the Noister, as Jim O'Neill described it, and as obviously TfN was funded to deliver that project some time ago. So keen to make sure we see northern delivery, not just northern talk. And at this Fringe, I think it's important to get to the heart of the issue. So Tim, great to have you on, and sorry to give you the TfN question bag as well as giving you a chance to answer on your own topics.
Oh, thank you very much, Henry. Really delighted to be here, and thank you very much as well to Devo Connect. So the MPR programme is approaching key milestones with big decisions to be made on our preferred network that we'll present to government. Investment in rail infrastructure will help provide long-term certainty and get the economy moving in the wake of the current COVID-19 crisis. It's true, we've seen a real contraction in passenger numbers over the past few months, but we are planning for the long term, for the rest of the 21st century and beyond. We cannot let the temporary shock of the pandemic allow us to contract in these decades to come. We actually want to get going, get levelling up the UK, and rail is certainly one of the ways to go forward. In development of Northern Powerhouse Rail, we're asking for the North to be freed from the straitjacket of poor infrastructure that has constrained the economy and its prospects for far too long. We need to consolidate planning and development across the North in one process to level up the British economy. I like to use the analogy of the plane flying with a single engine to just refer to the country's economy. At the moment, we're far too heavily reliant on one engine, that London and South East engine. It's not just a gap, it's a chasm. But the north of England has huge untapped potential, and properly resourced can help redress that imbalance. By 2040, the north of England will have a world-class railway network helping to underpin a world-class economy. We must meet this challenge if we're going to help to grow the northern economy, and we can only do this if northern transport organisations, combined and local authorities and private businesses work together to help meet the future skills need. At Transport for North, we're ideally placed to help this collaboration happen. We need to bring the short and the long-term projects together in a continuous pipeline of investment from now until 2040. And I'm not just talking about MPR. This should include road investment, local connectivity, and active travel plans to meet the decarbonisation agenda. Transport is the largest emitting sector, producing 27% of all UK greenhouse gas emissions. But rail is by far the most carbon efficient mass transport system available. In 2017, greenhouse emissions from road transport made up around a fifth of the UK's total GHG emissions. By contrast, rail accounts for less than 1% of the overall carbon emissions. Every extra freight train takes up 76 lorries off the road. And absolutely, I understand where Julian was coming from at that point. It's really key. We need to get more freight on the rail. And actually, by programs like HS2, Northern Powerhouse Rail, it's going to release capacity on the existing rail network. And that's for both freight and also for regional services. We're backing pilots of green technology such as hydrogen battery trains, which have the potential to decarbonise whole swathes of Northern Rail network without the need for expensive and disruptive work to bridges and to tunnels. And it's not just about infrastructure that MPR will provide. It's also about upskilling a whole generation of people in construction, engineering, the digital economy, and much more. If HS2 and MPR are to be developed, we need to be training the next generation of engineers, going into those schools and colleges to show what can really be done in the rail industry. We need about 50,000 people to be able to achieve this goal. We stand at a really important moment in the North's history. The steps we take over the next few years will really help shape our destiny and our journeys for decades. Thank you very much for that. Henry, just back on the question for the smart ticketing. So we do have our program within TfN. We have had a number of issues and we've gone ahead in terms of delivering in tranches. The bus industry had particularly developed further on than we were. So we actually ended up with a position whereby we've moved first of all onto the trains. So getting our smart ticketing rolled out there. So you'll see that on Northern and TPE as they were services. Then what you'll start to see is further collaboration with the bus industry and with that wider audience, trams as well. So we do achieve that goal of literally a tap and go across the North. So what will happen is that when you reach the end of your journey, the best price that you could possibly have paid for that journey, that is what you'll be charged at. It is a journey that we're going along and quite clearly, you know, we have had a number of issues, but we're very clear as to the objective and the goals and we are well funded to do that.
Thanks, Tim. We've got some great conversations happening on the chat and really pleased to see so much lively discussion. And I think I think we've got a number of people waiting to get in, but I'm going to bring in Jamie next and then come back to some of the people who've really wanted to really try and get their voices into the discussion. Jamie's already been kindly answering some really exciting questions about the role of clearly the North of Tyne Combined Authority in the context that clearly doesn't yet have transport powers. But I think it's particularly welcome to see Jamie being so clear that his aspiration would be to join together with NECA, with the North East Combined Authority, with the South of Tyne authorities to create an authority which could take on transport powers rather than relying on the current joint committee, which he obviously serves on to represent the North of Tyne Combined Authority, along with a number of the other leaders from the North and South banks of the river. So Jamie, really delighted you've been with us today and really keen to hear your insights, I know, on local transport, which are issues that are particularly important to you, and be really delighted perhaps to hear a bit more about how you see kind of becoming a transport authority working. Clearly, I know the former Minister for Levelling Up, Simon Clarke, was very supportive of that, but I also understand that government remain very much committed to supporting that change if that is something that attracts the broad-based support that I certainly believe it has from other politicians, and also most importantly from business and communities in the north of England, in the northeast, who particularly see the value of transport to bringing together an economy which is in reality a functioning economic geography. So people do commute in and out of Newcastle every day, and between its surrounding communities and businesses, that's just a matter of reality. And football rivalries may be genuinely divided by rivers, but that's pretty much the only thing about the northeast of England from my time living there that corresponds to that set of boundaries. And so admittedly it might be a good model for dividing football allegiances, but not for economics. So great to have you with us, Jamie, and really look forward to hearing your insights.
Thanks, Henry. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, the bridges across the Tyne are legendary, emblematic, and bridges are about bringing people together, not keeping them apart. So been in discussions with people in the south of Tyne. We had a meeting scheduled with Simon Clark, and as ever, the rug is pulled from you at the last minute. He went and resigned for personal reasons. But that's now back on track, and we're all meeting Luke Hall on Wednesday. So we'll see what comes out of that. There's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes. It's interesting. I mean, Andy was talking about a lot of what I'm going to say. It's not because we compared notes, it's because we're both in similar positions. When we're talking about levelling up, that's, in one sense, that's a glib phrase, isn't it? And you've sometimes got to question the premise of these things. I don't want the people of the Northeast to be levelling up to the level of the people of Hackney or Brixton. It's not the case that it's a land of gold and honey down south. What we're talking about when we take levelling up is improving people's lives. What we want is the 15 million people in the north to have security and comfort and self-fulfillment. The levelling up is about levelling up people, and it should not be seen solely through the perspective of railway tracks, dual carriageways, or anything to do with infrastructure. Because you need to take people with you. Use an example about COVID. It's spreading, not because we haven't got the right restrictions. It's spreading because a small number of people just aren't following the restrictions. It's the same thing with crime. It's illegal to do a load of things, but people still do them. So it's no good just having a transport system which is available for people unless it's actually designed in a way around those people and their needs. Otherwise you're pushing on spring. When we talk about green transport, you see more adverts for Teslas than you do for hydrogen buses. And if you're talking to people and you're saying, oh yeah, green transport, yeah, get a Tesla. You think, what, that's 70 grand? I can't afford one of them, is what 99% of people will say. And there is the risk that climate becomes the next Brexit, that it's seen as a culture war, that those people who are furthest from prosperity see it as yet a further indication that, this idea that you must fix it yourself through your personal choices. Well, it's not. We need a transport system that supports that, but not just a transport system. A lot of active travel I'm massively supportive of. But if you live 30 miles from where you work, you're not going to walk and cycle, even with an electric bike. So we want to move us towards a TfL style system. We can only do that in the Northeast if we come together, because the Tyne and Wear Metro spans the Tyne. And you can't have any practical governance system that doesn't cover that full geography. And so in the budget in March, the government pushed forwards that we would get our share of the 4.2 billion transport money earmarked for mayoral combined authority if we come together as a single MTA. And we're negotiating a whole range of other things. Obviously, there's economic stimulus as a result of recovering from this COVID recession. That's part and parcel of that. And as I said, we're working on that. But I want to focus mostly Tim and others have spoken very much about the intercity across the wider northern region. But if we look at the intra, which is what most people's daily experience is, we need to be thinking about it moving people and not vehicles. We need to be thinking of a whole new way of delivering a transport network. So what I want is an entire system that looks at it as mobility as a service, where everything is on one of these. So if you want to drive, you book your parking space in the city centre in advance. If you want to get to work, you need the last mile solutions so that people can either go with their e-bikes or their e-scooters and actually get to the metro station, to the bus stop, and take it on the bus with them. Or in city centres, have the secure parking, because it's not just the lack of bike infrastructure in journeys, it's people worried about getting their bike in, actually enough. We need to be widening it so it's not just about street furniture, so that, is there a shower at work? That puts off a lot of people cycling. We need to get the stage where you can just rock up, you can tap in, tap out, go wherever you want. And that includes hiring a bike at the other end if you need to. It includes, if you want to, hiring a car for the weekend, because we need to get the stage where people can get to work or education on public transport quicker and cheaper than owning a car. It costs about £4,600 a year to own and run a car. It doesn't cost that to move on public transport. But of course, once you've bought it, it's a sunk cost, and you decide that you're going to use it. We need to get at the point where people feel liberated from their cars. If we can do that, then, well, people might still want a car to get the shopping. Well, There's all sorts of solutions for that, all sorts of green freight, order online. And we need to be getting the stage where if people want a car to go away for the weekend, well, just hire one through a car club. So we do that. I want us to see 100,000 cars fewer in Tyneside. And this is going to require us to think about things a bit more boldly. We almost accept that we're going to replace petrol cars with sustainably fueled cars, but the cars themselves use massive amount of resources. It's unsustainable. The planet can't support it. And Henry Ford's famous quote, of course, he says, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So let's shift our thinking and think about rock-up transport, where you can have the same convenience as a car. You don't have to plan, you don't have to book your ticket. You can just get up and you can say, right, I want to go there. Boom, that's the cheapest way. That's the fastest way. And these are your options. Great. And you can just go and do it. And we can do freight, not perhaps bulk freight, but a large amount of freight that is delivery of parcels and things like that we can do in a similar way. Partly by actually having more resilient supply chain, so we don't have to move as much stuff about. Local food production is something that we could certainly be moving towards. But all sorts of, particularly in city areas, green freight, there's businesses now, entrepreneurial businesses, setting up with e-bikes, delivering things, delivering medical supplies between the hospitals and the pharmacies in Newcastle. This is the sort of thing we should be supporting, and using various public incentives to support that, whether that's through tax and investment. There's all sorts of ways we can do it. We need to get ahead of this. The consequences of getting the climate response wrong are unthinkable. When we're talking about HS2 being delivered in 20 years, and it's not even going to come to Newcastle, then, well, it might be too late. We're going to hit 430 parts per million of CO2 in the next 6 or 7 years. And that's the point at which the IPCC said it's too late. So the methods we do it, well, we need the funding. So yes, that involves central government signing a check. And given that they've just spent about 40 billion on furlough to pay people to stay at home, well, the will should be there to spend people to do something productive that gives us these productive assets for the future. We also need devolved funding, things like land value cap. We've been trying to get the Northumberland line funded in southeast Northumberland to Newcastle since about 2005, and it's still not fully signed off. If we had the power to use land value capture, when we invest as a public, the values shoot up, well, let us claim that back and we can build a thing. It would have been there for the last 10 years with all the housing, all the development, all the things we want to see, all done on a sustainable basis if we'd had those powers. We need to invest to save. Obesity is going to cost this country 50 billion a year by 2050. The best way to tackle obesity isn't more leaflets, isn't sugar taxes. It's actually a transport system that gets people using their own legs. So let's close the loop on this. It's only devolution can do it. David earlier was talking about needing a pipeline of investment. It's only integration that can do that. It's only local planning to make sure the houses are in the right place with the transport system, to make sure that where people want to go on a night out matches the transport system, to make sure that people have that freedom to move across a region and fulfill their potentials. This is the best way to create jobs and prosperity, and it will pay for itself in the long run.
Thanks so much, Jamie, and really good to hear your views. And obviously, as one of those people who campaigned for a new rail line to Newcastle along as part of the HS2 network almost 10 years ago now, I can feel the scars on my back. But obviously, one of the positives, of course, and the North East Chamber of Commerce, who aren't with us today, but would obviously make this point, is that upgrading the East Coast Main Line does mean that HS2 services will come to Newcastle and to Darlington. And obviously, the benefits of that, including those MPR services using the upgraded infrastructure, can be secured before a new line is open. And I think great to hear that focus on transport within city regions, but obviously many Geordies and Mackhams, and in the future Mackhams that may be part of a wider area, will need to travel further in order to get those productivity benefits for the North East to raise the living standards of people there. So is that double-edged sword? Is it we need the last mile, we need people to be able to get to train stations, to bus stops, and to light rail in the case of metro, but we also then need the onward connectivity options so that we can give people those seamless end-to-end journeys. Very much the purpose of the Noyster that I was challenging Tim about earlier, the idea that you can integrate ticketing but also decarbonise journeys so that the end customer doesn't have to worry about that, but actually that we found ways to be able to patch those systems together. Next, we're going to go to Claire Haig, who's Chief Executive of Greener Journeys, just to give a couple of reflections. Then we'll be going on to Councillor Angeliki Stogia, before we then open it up to a few of our attendees who've been having a very lively conversation on the chat. And there's a particular challenge from Laurie to you, Jamie, which I'm sure you may respond to on the chat anyway, but otherwise I'll come back to you to give Laurie a chance to ask that question on the line itself, because I think it's a really interesting one. So Claire, do you want to come in next, and then we'll come to you, Angeliki, after that?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, this has been a brilliant discussion, by the way. I've been really getting so much out of it. And Jamie, what you were saying was a whistle-stop, a fantastic summary. I mean, you just covered, I was just writing down all the points that you were covering that were kind of in the comments that I was going to make, actually. But I really, really agree with you, starting with the fully integrated system, echoing comments that you were reflecting on. In fact, let's go back to Andy Burnham this morning. We're talking about the hierarchy of walking, cycling, then public transport, but this integration is absolutely key. Moving people, not vehicles. So this integration with land use planning, absolutely essential as well. And there's just so many, I mean, in a sense, I was hoping I could just pick up on your points or go through my speech, but they're pretty much the same. I mean, but so I will just, rather than go through it in the interest of time, and so other people have got time to come in, I just highlight a couple of things. And and by the way, en masse, we want people to reach for their iPhone rather than their car keys, don't we? That's the thing. And have a system where you can see all public transport options and the walking and the cycling routes, and how you can, it's making it easy for people to make the right choices. And also the solution to obesity, of course, it's active travel. And we have seen a big uptick in active travel over the pandemic. We need to lock in those improvements, those changes, actually. But I guess the thing that I probably do need to focus on, there has been a dramatic impact on public transport, but it does have a key role to play as we move into, well, when eventually we move into recovery. Of course, the latest kind of second wave is very unsettling. You know, public transport levels are likely to go plummet again, let's be honest. But, you know, looking ahead, you know, we know that, you know, that as has been said by many speakers, you know, car use is what we've got to bring down, and a more efficient system for freight and logistics is going to be crucial as well. I mean, there have been some changes which we want to embrace. So there's been some big structural changes that have been accelerated, like more working from home. Good, that's a good thing. But at the same time, you know, if we are going to encourage that further, and a better use of the investment in roads could be on broadband, we do need that more efficient system for freight and logistics. You know, in nose-to-tail traffic, emissions from vehicles increase fourfold. It's very serious. But the main point that I'd like to add, which I think possibly hasn't been covered already, is that there is no prospect of a sustainable transport system without road pricing. So, you know, London, agreed, we need a London style, we need that integrated, but London has had congestion charging as well. So this was looked at in Manchester in 2006. It was emphatically rejected at the time. Who knows, maybe things are changing. But even if road pricing is a bridge too far, we've got to start sending the right price signals. So the freeze and fuel duty is an obvious one that I do go on about quite a lot, because we've shown that the impact of since the freeze since 2011 has been 5% more traffic, 5 million additional tons of CO2 emissions, 250 million fewer bus journeys, and 75 million fewer rail journeys. It's a kind of drop in the ocean on one level. On the other hand, it shows you how powerful that signal is. So we've really got to get that right. I mean, I think the point around, you know, reducing the need to travel as well, I think is just the sort of urban villages, land use planning. You know, the more we can build, you know, not build the perspective for congestion, but actually build sustainable transport in right from the start is absolutely crucial. So that's another point I'd really like to emphasize. And the other one that you touched on, so there's so many, I'm just going to have to sort of finish quickly because I could go on. Better devolution, absolutely crucial. If you look at the difference between the North and what's happened in Scotland and London, you know, we just need better, much more, greater, better devolution. And authorities need to be planning on a sustained long-term, you know, 5-year budgets, longer term, as the National Infrastructure Commission has been calling for. Because all of this is crucial. I mean, all of these points, all of these different aspects connect. I could go on, but I'm sure plenty of people will want to come in. So I hope that gives a flavour and some feedback.
Fantastic, Claire, and a pleasure to have you with us. And last but not least, Councillor Angeliki Studje from the Greater Manchester Transport Committee, and a councillor in Greater Manchester, of course. Really lovely to have you with us. And we've obviously had a really wide-ranging discussion, but we never quite got on to Piccadilly Station or how we get Manchester HS2 ready. We haven't got into some of what I consider to be some of the most exciting and novelty issues in northern transport. But I feel like the government, in the course of its response and its development of the IRP, the Integrated Rail Plan, which Tim was very well behaved in not launching into full scale, because that's an exciting topic in itself. I feel like progress might be coming on a deal on that, and it does feel like Greater Manchester, by working together with other northern leaders, with other metro mayors and council leaders like Nick Forbes in Newcastle, for instance, who supported as chair of the Convention of the North the campaign on Piccadilly, that there has been that joint purpose to bring progress on that issue, and it has succeeded. So it'd be really good to hear a bit more about that issue, but also anything else you've heard, Angeliki, that you want to reference. But it doesn't seem quite right to have a Northern Transport Fringe at a Labour Party conference, admittedly virtual, and not talk about Piccadilly, because if we don't talk about it, people might forget the importance of having a hub of that quality in the north of England to enable people to get simple journeys like from Liverpool to Leeds, right, which at the moment is very difficult, and it could still be difficult even with MPR. So it'd be great to get your insights on that, Angeliki.
Absolutely. Thank you, Henry. Thanks for making that introduction. Good morning, everyone. HS2 and NPR are core transformational infrastructure components in the Greater Manchester Growth Strategy, as well as the wider agenda, if you like, for economic rebalancing of our country. And given the long-term impact that coronavirus will have in the society and the economy, including exacerbating existing inequalities, the role of these infrastructure schemes in the government agenda to level up the economy becomes all the more, I think, important. Just before I get into some of the main points I want to make with regards to the creation of the Northern Transport Acceleration Council, this is a very welcome statement of intent from the government to work with the northern leaders to bring forward this modern transport network the North has lacked for far too long. However, this must now be matched with significant investments by the government if it is serious actually about levelling up and rebalancing in the UK economy. And alongside investment in regional infrastructure, if the levelling up agenda is to be actually realised, it might also, like other speakers have said, must be matched with greater devolution of powers and responsibilities in regions, for example, as Greater Manchester. Such powers would come together with the identification and the establishment of reliable and long-term funding streams. It is crucial that there will be a move to support transport authorities as coordinators, integrators of transport services between and across all the modes in order to be able to achieve truly integrated transport, to be operationally effective and to deliver also the return of investment that we want to see in line with the local priorities. I mean, the other thing that I wanted to sort of highlight, we are going to be hosting COP in next year. And I think that the government has a unique opportunity to show its intentions and actually put something on the map and start projects going across the country. And to be fair, in general, there has been a real underinvestment in transport, in particular public transport, in English cities outside London for decades. In Manchester, we have had to fight for the transport system that we had every step of the way, and we have had to be innovative, and we have had to put our business cases, and we tried all sorts of things. Some worked and were accepted by people, some were not. For example, the Metrolink system, it first opened in 1992. but it took us over 2 decades in order to deliver the green Metrolink network that we've got. And it doesn't serve the whole of the city of Manchester. We've got transport deserts right across the city, in the north as well as in the south. And this is why bus is very, very important to our residents, and devolution of powers and the public control of bringing public transport buses into control is very, very important. Our buses were deregulated in 1986, and planning buses since as part of a properly integrated network has been a mighty challenge. Mayor Burnham said that cities are built for the car. Well, I disagree with that. I think cities were built for people and their needs, but if their needs are actually not met by a functioning public transport system, which is the way that cities should go about sorting out the transport, what should people do? And given the situation that we're in, car, of course, is the most preferred natural choice, easier option. Definitely for the longer trips, therefore it's becoming a habit. So now you want to nip to your local shop and you just get in the car, given also the fancy weather that we've got in Manchester. So, you know, let's not blame people. Let's just look at what we are going to do. And I think in terms of electrical vehicle infrastructure, of course we want to change our fleet, and of course we've got our Greater Manchester Clean Air Plan. But what we want to do is not to replace every single diesel gasping, fuel gasping diesel vehicle with an electric vehicle, because then congestion is not going to go away. Never mind the affordability of the whole thing that Mayor Jamie touched upon. What we want is, as every other modern city in Europe, we need a functioning mass transit system, and this is the one that we have been fighting for a long time. And just about also the rail network, we have argued long and hard for investment in our local rail network. We have seen some goodwill from the government, and we've got this unique opportunity to make things work, to get the economy back on. There's so many implications. You know, you got opportunities with regards to skills, getting the economy started, keeping the economy going, supporting SMEs along the supply chain. So it has been good to see some goodwill from the government. It has been good to eventually see some new trains arriving recently, and the delivery also of the cords to connect Piccadilly and Victoria. But we still need more. We still need the additional platforms in Piccadilly, more capacity on Oxford Road, and if in Greater Manchester we've got an even more ambitious plan from that the government has. The government target to become zero carbon is 2050. We have spoken to the scientists at the University of Manchester, and our targets to become zero carbon is 2038, is a Paris compliant target. We're putting everything in place that it is in our power in order to deliver that, but unless we've got the government on our side and the partnerships with people that work in the sector, we are all going to let our residents down. And I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Angeliki. And I think, I mean, a great exposition of all of that transport thinking from within Greater Manchester that has shaped so much of the Northern debate. And it's great to see a new generation of political leaders who are as assertive and across these really important issues as those that have come before you, if that makes sense. And I think certainly your line about cities and who they are for, I think sums up probably 20, 30 years of thought in Greater Manchester, but to hear it put so eloquently is a great reminder to us all of why we're all here, right? Because if it wasn't for the Greater Manchester project, there would be no Northern Powerhouse, there would be no TFN. And that intellectual thinking about what transport is for, its economic purpose, in terms of as an enabler of growth and higher productivity, I think is sometimes not talked about enough. And it was great to hear Tim earlier make such positive reference to it, because I think we do need to ensure that we don't lose the intellectual thread of why we care about transport, but it comes back in the end to people and to people's lives. and to people's well-being and their opportunity. And I think that's something that certainly it's great to hear it said again in your position of influence, Angeliki, that it's still being pursued so vigorously. I particularly wanted now to bring in Jordan Sargent from Transport Focus to give us a bit of a passenger view, and then we're going to come back to some of the rest of our panel, including those who speak for the passenger of goods, so colleagues from ABP, because we have talked a lot about passengers, and I think we're about to talk more about passengers, but we do also want to still talk about freight in the context of that decarbonisation journey. So Jordan, do you want to come in and give us your reflections if you can switch your camera on?
I don't appear to have the option to switch my camera on, but you can hear me, I hope, in any case.
Yeah, we can hear you.
That's good. Thank you, Henry. So I'm Jordan Sargent from Transport Focus with the Independent Transport User Watchdog. What I wanted to reflect on, it's been really interesting hearing the comments of all the panelists. It's about the dramatic shift we're seeing to greater working from home. And Transport Focus research over the recent weeks has found consistently that more than half of working people expect to work from home in future. And that trend, in fact, has been increasing in recent weeks. It seems it's kind of embedding. And it seems very likely that the announcement later today will make this change all the more permanent, as people have adapted and become accustomed to doing things like this and talking to each other on Zoom. So as a watchdog, we've been pressing very, very hard for urgent reform of transport fares, to offer flexible season tickets for commuters who are going to be travelling into the office or their other workplaces less often. But my kind of question to the rest of the panel really is, there's been a lot of very encouraging kind of aspirations for improving public transport network and for investing. But it's a question about how we fund this and how we build and maintain a sustainable public transport network if commuter numbers remain lower in the long term, and how we kind of counter that financial pressure and the real loss of revenue that might result.
Brilliant reflections there, Jordan. I was going to probably come back to people in reverse order, because that does seem more of a question for Angeliki than some of the others on the panel. So Angeliki, do you want to come back in? Is that okay? Would you be happy to answer Jordan's question and then maybe come to you as well, Claire, to get some of your reflections as well?
I can have a go. I can start. Well, I think the government has got a very big role to play in terms of transport. I think, it's all in the context of rebalancing the economy. And it is also about supporting the regions to reach their sort of full potential. A report from the Centre for Core Cities earlier this year highlighted that the underperformance of big cities is at the heart of the North and the South divide, and this is very, very big part of the government agenda. So if our government wants to level up the country, we have to tackle the economic problem through through a range of economic measures, including improving public transport networks. The report also says that it is important that among underperforming cities, if the 8 largest closed their output gap, the UK economy would be 47.4 billion larger in total, equivalent to adding 2 extra economies the size of Newcastle to the national output. So Manchester, Birmingham and Glasgow account for 70% of this gap. Now this, for me, does make the case for government investment. But of course, we need to look at other innovative financial models, and we need to look at our friends in Europe and in other countries outside Europe to see how we can fund transport initiatives in a way where the public sector and the private sector are working together in order to deliver services for the public, for the paying public.
Thanks, Angeliki. And I'm going to go to Claire next, if that's okay.
Thank you, yes. And no, thank you. And actually, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Transport Focus, in fact, for the work they've been doing through the pandemic, because it's been incredibly helpful getting this kind of constant kind of check. It's been really thorough and really helpful and really informative. And it does show just the impact of some of the messaging that we do need to now work carefully around in terms of if we are going to get people back onto public transport, it's really important to work on some of that. I wanted to specifically also pick up on a point that Angelica made, and as if I may, which comes back to Jordan's comment. I think you were absolutely spot on with what you said around how the public transport, if people are, the people driving because there isn't an alternative. We have to improve the public transport system. I mean, actually, that's one of the reasons I think why car use is particularly high in the north. I just want to share a stat which I didn't mention in my earlier comments, which is there is a very, if we talk about the levelling up agenda, there's a really clear link between access to public transport and levels of social deprivation. So research that we have done that shows that a 10% decrease in public transport connectivity is associated with a 3.6% increase in social deprivation. So it's at the heart, the levelling up, the climate, all of that, these things are absolutely entwined. So I just sort of wanted to reflect those comments as well.
Thank you so much. Just to get in as broad a range of voices as possible, I'm going to try and get in some more comments and questions. And I think that there was a number of people who kindly asked you questions, Jamie, which you've answered on the chat. I was going to ask next if we could bring in perhaps another one of our participants. So Matthew Grieger, I know we've got Matthew on the line. Perhaps we could maybe bring in Matthew next.
Hi, Henry. Thanks. Can you hear me?
Hi, Matthew. Yeah, great to have you here.
And thanks to everyone for really interesting comments. Very important and timely discussion, I think. The national infrastructure strategy is still to be seen and could well be delayed further given the context. I think it's important that part of the road to recovery and indeed decarbonisation also takes into account where we can create high quality jobs, particularly in the north. Where is that strategic direction going to come from, and what policies do the panelists think are necessary, both at a central level, but also importantly at a devolved level, to make that happen?
And who'd like to come back on Matthew's question? Any volunteers from the panel? Open to everyone?
So I'd like to come back on that one, if that's okay, Henry.
Tim, yeah, great.
So, I mean, let's be absolutely clear. We haven't got the capacity or the connectivity in the north of England at the moment, particularly through the railways. So the fast trains cannot overtake the slower trains or the freight trains. The agglomeration effect between the great cities of Manchester and Leeds is just at 40% at the moment. There's a massive set of eyes on the prize. We go back to where was the first intercity train? Well, it's back in 1830, and it was between Liverpool and Manchester. We have lost our way in the north. We need to be absolutely clear to government through Northern Powerhouse Rail, through other development work, Skipton to Cone. There are a number of other major schemes sorting Manchester out. Actually, we can't wait because it's really affecting our economies even harder. And with an overlay of COVID-19, what happens to the workforce? There's 240,000 people that work in the railway industry. When we're starting to look at potential money coming off the enhancements portfolio over this control period, it's a worrying sign that they are high-class jobs, well-paid jobs in the railways, and actually can be utilised their skills across a wide range of industries. What we don't want to do is lose what we had. So we've seen with the Doncaster and High Speed 2 College there, it's really struggled. One of my tests for MPR was that needed to be absolutely chocker with students going through, understanding about railway technology, and then coming out to be able to deliver the schemes that we've got. We cannot have a strategy, as is continued on with NR, where it's been a boom and bust. We need a very clear pipeline of work. We need to make sure that the skills are sat around that, and we need to make sure that it's a multifaceted industry, transport per se. We need to make sure that we do have lines of communication, that the cash comes in, and we are looking for the government to fund this in its entirety in terms of Northern Powerhouse Rail. It's really important that we continue to see that funding coming through, particularly in the CSR that's planned for November. If we bury our heads, this will not happen. So we need to be very clear that we push on hard, we get over the line, the strategic outline case, and then we actually get on with the job. There are a number of schemes already in MPR that we're pushing: new station at Barnsley Durham Valley, new station at Rotherham Midland Main Line, surveys out on the track. These are being done well before a strategic outline case should have been finished. So I think it's important that we continue to move at pace and that the Northern leaders speak with one voice. So each of our board meetings, when we're producing our papers, it's important that they send that message very clear to the government and also to the IRP work that's going on at the moment to make sure that we have a fully integrated rail solution, which bakes into, particularly Angeliki was saying that, and Andy and Jamie as well, it's not just a transport mode, it's what you have at each end of that: cycling, walking. So I live in Lancaster. I have never worked from home in my entire life. I've always been in the office. From the 17th of March, I've been at home all the time, because that is the way that, you know, for us, we've had to work. But it's been a very interesting scenario. But I want to get back out there. But for us, we need to make sure that in the thinking that we build into NPR and the other transport programs, that we do absolutely get in that active travel piece. It's vitally important.
Yeah, of course. I think one more very brief comment, and then we're going to bring in one more question before we come to an end.
Right. Sorry, I just want to make the general point around affordability. We've got to get the pricing right. So at the moment, and a comment that Andy made, and Jamie, you were talking about some bolder thinking, bolder solutions that could be needed. You know, we have a public transport, we have a system that is predicated on the car. So changing how we pay for our road use, sorry to keep banging on about it, but raising fuel duty. But this is a way of gaining revenue, sending the right signals, and that revenue that can be invested in sustainable transport. I will duck out. Thank you.
Great. No, it's fine. I'm just conscious we've had a few people. I'm not sure we're going to get all of them in, but Stephen, you were asking Jamie about the boundaries for public transport and bringing in the right structures. Did you have a follow-up or anything you wanted to ask based on your earlier question to the wider panel? You there, Stephen? So I think, Stephen, you'll need to come off mute. I think if we can't hear from Stephen, we'll go to our next question, which was one from Anne Singleton. Are you still there, Anne?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Brilliant. Anne, do you want to ask your question?
It wasn't really a question. It was just to say I completely agreed with the point about equalities, and I'd like to highlight the need for full participation and consultation with all groups of users. I like the comment about from 8-year-olds to 80-year-olds. I'd stretch that to 8 weeks old to 108-year-olds, because I think I live in Ilkley, so Henry, we probably met. I think we've met before, but I think what struck me in the lockdown was how pleasant the town became when we didn't have to deal with navigating via these horrific 4x4 Land Rover type status symbol vehicles, and that the town became a pleasant place, and we saw a lot more older people, a lot more children out. It was a much more pleasant place, and it was a kind of disappointment when we saw all these horrible vehicles come back again. So to have a transport system that allows us to actually socialise and be more of a community, even in a small town, or for me to be able to go to London to help my friend who's having an open heart surgery, and safely travel, knowing that I'm not going to carry terrible diseases there. We need safety in all respects, really. And if it's designed for the most vulnerable or the smallest people or the largest people, then it'll be fit for everyone. But if the transport is designed for young, fit, middle-aged and tall men, then it doesn't work for the majority of people. So I was just wanted to reinforce that point.
No, great, Anne. And it's been a really lively and interesting discussion. I think we're going to bring in Kendrick, and then we'll have just some closing comments from the speakers. We'll try and bring in as many as we can. Kendrick, did you want to ask a very quick question? Then we'll get one or two of the panel to respond, and then we'll finish up.
It's just a question I asked earlier. Do people think it's sort of already been answered by Jamie, but do the other panelists feel it's important to take into account the needs of disabled people and make sure that that's sort of known to the public? Because I know, so people know that when we're putting these policies forward, we are addressing their needs. Thanks.
No, it's great. And as someone who used to work in the disability sector, Kendrick, I know what an important enabler transport is for people's economic and financial security, if that makes sense, as well as their wider social lives and being able to have the freedoms and the things others can enjoy anyway. Particularly, obviously, I mean, Greater Manchester, Angelique's got a particularly strong offer in terms of its accessibility on the public transport network, but also in terms of its wider availability of public transport to all groups in society. Did you have any reflections, Angelique, on particularly around buses, for instance, about how we could ensure that perhaps a differently designed bus network might work for those with different needs? Because clearly we talk very much about the importance of planning bus services in Greater Manchester, but there are a number of benefits to a more joined up system that lots of different public transport users might feel. So is that something you feel you could comment on, Angelique? And then we'll get if you could give us some closing comments as well, then we'll quickly get members of the panel to give us 30 seconds as well.
Thank you. Just really wanted to quickly say that in terms of making public transport and buses truly accessible, first of all, they need to go where people want them to go, because currently most of the buses bring you in the centre of Manchester, but we don't have radial sort of routes, and also we're not connecting very well with district centres, hospitals and other sort of points of interest. So it's not only a joined up integrated system, it's a system that takes you where you want to go, that it is accessible for disabled people, but it is also accessible by all people in the community and in the society. And also we are going to be able, hopefully, to look at concessions in a different way. I think safety is also very, very important. If public transport is not clean, is not safe, people are not going to use it, and this is something also which is very, very important. Lastly, just to reflect on equalities, I think perhaps this is a topic for a larger discussion in terms of transport inequalities. There are not many women in transport, there are not many women leading transport, there are not many women serving transport, driving transport, and I think that this is something to address, and this is before we even go to look at the ethnic mix. So I think lastly, just to remember, I mean, transport is very, very important. It is, as an executive member for Highways in the City and the Transport Committee, I hear loud and clear how important transport is, roads, buses, light rail, streets, pavements, getting from A to B, a very, very important priority. Every time we consult for our budget, it comes third or fourth on things that people want to talk about. So thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss this here today, and I hope that I meet with you in the near future.
Thanks, Angelique. And I did want to come to all the panel for sort of final comments, but in the etiquette of Zoom, we are now over. We have overrun in this session. So I was really just going to ask Julian, as our sponsor from ABP and as one of our leading northern businesses, to just give us some reflections at this Labour Connected event, to send us on our way and really remind people about why decarbonisation is so important, not just to the economy, but to communities and all of us as individuals.
Henry, thank you very much, and thank you for everybody who has participated, both speakers and also those asking questions. Thank you. It is fascinating listening to this. You know, I'm very much coming from the perspective of freight, but the importance of transport for the people is obviously fundamental, both in terms of improving the life quality for people in our cities throughout the UK, not just in the north. So thank you for that. It's been really, really interesting to hear everybody's thoughts. I think touching on the point made about a single voice and having everything aligned, you know, we are fortunate from an industry perspective of having Northern Powerhouse Rail, which supports, let's say, the landside movement of goods, which is going to be fundamental to improve the efficiency of that. But I think, you know, as it's been made on many occasions through the discussion, that single voice and aligned
measures related to COVID-19
is going to be fundamental going forward. So thank you everybody for participating. You know, I look forward to having further discussions on this and hearing more on this debate. But, you know, given where we are, and I think Jamie made the point about the importance and the need for us to act now, because 6 or 7 years time is going to be too late. It is fundamental that both industry, the private sector, the public sector, you know, pressurize central government to make those ambitious moves and support that's required to drive that change. So thank you everybody. That's been really fascinating, and I hope everybody has a good and safe day.
Thank you so much. And I've just seen from Jamie's comments in the chat that I think he's offering to cycle for COP26 to Glasgow. So he obviously has given up his car, as was being suggested by others, perhaps as a good strategy for us all. So thank you so much to Devo Connect in particular, to Jill and her colleagues for making today possible. And we look forward to seeing you not just at the next party conference season, but at many of Devo Connect's events for the rest of the conference programme. So thanks very much and have a great day. Bye everyone.
Thanks, Henry. Thank you.
Bye-bye.